We're gonna kick this off. So welcome everyone to the Festivus themed webinar for onboarding professionals. And this is the first of its kind. So I'm really excited to have you guys all join. And thank you again to our panelists. If you're a fan of Seinfeld, you already know that Festivus is the holiday for the rest of us. It's a made-up holiday to air grievances and celebrate feats of strength. So today we're giving it a little bit of an onboarding twist. Instead of family squabbles, we are airing common grievances in onboarding processes, and our feats of strength are going to be the actionable solutions and advice from our panelists that you can use to overcome them. This webinar is hosted by Setuply, a purpose-built onboarding solution designed to accelerate time to value with powerful tools that empower internal and client teams to collaborate seamlessly. Onboarding deserves its spotlight. It's not just a checkbox under post-sales, and that's why we're all here today. The idea for this Festivus webinar came from Onboarding World, which Setuply held in October in Boston. Many other participants shared that there's a recurring challenge. There's not enough dedicated space or content for onboarding and implementation professionals to exchange strategies. So we know onboarding is critical. It sets the tone for long-term client relationships, but we haven't really been afforded a space to share those strategies together. And that's what we're really coming together to do here with sort of a cheeky theme. To help us tackle some of these topics, we're thrilled to have three amazing panelists. We have Josh Robinson, who is the president of Checkmate HCM, Helen Bubeck, who is the Senior Manager of Client Success at Crisis24, and Osiris Childs, the Enterprise Client Onboarding Team Lead at Deal. I would love to invite each of you to give a little background, introduce yourself to the panelists. Let's start with Osiris.
Yes, awesome. Thank you, Kristen. Everyone, nice to meet you. My name is Osiris. I work at Deal. Currently, I manage our enterprise onboarding team, and my entire background is in customer success and implementation in the HR tech ecosystem. So, definitely love working with clients, and most importantly, working with clients during the implementation phase. I think it's the most valuable and brings, ensures the most stickiness for clients long-term with whatever product or service. I'm so excited to be a part of this conversation today and dive into all of this with you all.
Great, Josh.
Hi, everyone. Josh Robinson. I'm the president and owner at Checkmate HCM. We are a payroll and HR technology company here based out of New Hampshire. I've been running Checkmate since 2013, but for about the last 4 or 5 years, been obsessive about process management, process improvement, to a point where we've been able to significantly increase our growth rate and through process automation and process just constantly improving our processes for implementing new clients, been able to we're growing 3 or 4 times as fast as we were 4 years ago, and we're doing it in a way that has a significant amount more scale behind it than we were before. Really exciting things going on with how we're able to allow our team to maximize their productivity by taking away the need to do all these copy and pastes and various other types of work that really don't require a brain.
Great, thank you so much, Josh. And Helen.
Yeah, super. Really excited to be here. Thankful for this time that we all get to spend together. My name is Helen Bubeck. I'm a senior manager of client success for a company called Crisis24. Different industry here that I'm representing. Crisis24 is a leading crisis management, integrated risk management solutions platform with many different softwares, also undergoing tremendous growth in the past couple of years. Most of their growth as a business has been coming from acquisitions. I feel like every couple of months we're acquiring some other company, which is really exciting and cool to see, but also means a ton of change management for everybody involved. So when you're thinking of client success and implementing new programs, kind of to Josh's point, looking at what processes we're using and how do we bring different teams together who've been doing things differently, and combining all kinds of different data from different sources. It's always an exciting project. So excited to dig into some of that with you guys.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for introducing yourselves and for being with us here today. Just in your introductions, I know this is going to be a great conversation. We have a couple topics that we're going to tackle. Change management, which Helen, you just kind of touched on. The transition from sales to onboarding. We've heard a lot of kind of pain points associated with that process. And we're also going to talk about adoption. So where do we go from the implementation process to creating these customers for life? How do we transition them? How do we roll it out? The way that we're going to structure this panelist is to kind of pose a question, and then Melissa, who is part of our marketing team, is going to pose that question in the chat. So if you miss it, don't worry, it's going to be in the chat. And I'm going to direct each of these questions at one of our panelists, and then we're going to have sort of a discussion afterwards. So if you have any questions or anything that like sparks a thought, go ahead and put it in the chat, and we will do questions at the end. And we can possibly do questions at the end of each question, depending on how many thoughts and comments we get. So please use that chat function in the webinar. We are happy to see what you're posting, because this is really supposed to be a colloquial chat for all of us to come together. So going into the topic of change management, Josh, we often work with individuals or teams on the client side with their own internal dynamics. We are making recommendations, but must finesse the situation to get everyone on board. How do you navigate situations where clients are unprepared or resistant to changes required for a truly successful implementation? Oh, Josh, you might be on mute. Classic struggle of the Zoom, I know.
Right, there you go. But that's a great question, and definitely speaks to a challenge we frequently are faced with. As we in the payroll and HR space, as we bring on new customers, oftentimes, we've been in a 3, 6, 9 month sales cycle. By the time a customer of 20 to 50 or more employees decides to come on board. Usually companies of that size have a couple of stakeholders involved. One of the things that we used to struggle with is exactly this, because we would be drowning in all of the technical details of what's required in order to bring the client onto our solution, importing, exporting, doing all of these mechanical things. And as we have focused on process refinement and inviting the client more into work with us on the implementation, it has freed up the time and brain power of our implementers so that they can actually, give consideration to who on the team of the client we're implementing, who is the saboteur. That is the number one question we always need to focus on, because there's almost always a saboteur, and knowing who they are is super important so that you can get in front of, the train wreck, and then, who is the real cheerleader or champion that we can go to, that will bring it back, if we do start to go sideways. So, we are able to effectively, through identifying those kind of people, start the experience in implementation off properly. Change management, I also want to just speak for, well, actually, you know what? I'm going to stop there.
Yeah. Cyrus, I saw you come off mute. Anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I think what Josh mentioned is really important during the implementation phase, identifying who the saboteur is, right? I think when we're looking at clients, and in regards to the industry, right, I think this applies to all industries. Typically, you have individuals amongst the client stakeholder group where not everyone is completely sold or not everyone is completely happy. And I think a lot of that when we're looking at in the tech space too, especially, similar industry for where I'm at right now with Deal, as Josh in this payroll and HR tech industry, some of what, these platforms are doing are in some way, shape or form taking away a little bit of someone's job, right? When we're looking at automation and we're looking at streamlining processes, depending on the role of the individual, it's taking a little bit away from them. And so you do have these stakeholders where during this transition phase, coming to whatever product or company that they're moving to, they recognize that their responsibilities are being taken away by automation, by system, by tech. And to them, there's part of that pushback for them maybe, well, I don't want to be completely sold and I want to make this a little difficult. So I retain my responsibilities, and whatever this new system is doesn't begin to be super apparent that it can do my job for me, right? And I think that's really important because as you go through the implementation, like Josh mentioned, like identify the champions, but also identify those individuals, because that's going to tailor your approach to your communication. And maybe for those individuals who aren't completely bought in, you give a little more, you sweet talk them a little bit more. You want to make sure that they really see the value in the product and what they're doing, and also make sure that they, whether it's true or not, they feel and believe that, hey, your job is safe, like, right, like things aren't being taken away from you. And I think that's a unique perspective in this HR tech landscape, because a lot of the automation is taking away some of the responsibility for these individuals.
Yeah, and what you just said there too about almost reselling, like we don't talk about that in implementation. We don't talk about the idea of having to really kind of reset these expectations. We're most of the time we definitely focus on that empathetic part, right? Like trying to kind of sweet talk, like you said, some of the saboteurs, but we don't really focus on that reselling piece, which we all do kind of innately just by either being excited about our own technology or meeting the challenge head on. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Helen, what were you going to say? I'm sorry I cut you off there.
Yeah, no, sorry. I just chimed in. I got excited. I completely agree. And I would just add on to that, in addition to identifying like who are the blockers, or I would say what, that persona, it's also important to consider like, why are they a blocker? And Osiris, you touched on it, like maybe this new software is making their job feel less relevant. They feel threatened. It could also be the exact opposite, where this is adding more work to their plate, because anytime that there's a new software involved, it's a new project for someone on their side too. And you might have a client that's thinking like, oh man, here we go, another project. Like I'm going to have to work so hard to implement this. This is going to take 3 months to get running. I'm going to have to manage this ongoing. And so I think that becomes up to us and our teams to figure out, okay, what is it that they're really worried about? How can I address those issues up front and make them feel comfortable that we're really going to hold their hands and help them and make this as easy as possible? And so I think, it's kind of just that one step beyond identifying like, who is our blocker to what is the blocker? Like, what are they really concerned about? And what can we do to make them feel more comfortable with what's coming?
Yeah, I think, and Helen, to build off of that, I think what's like we did two key things here, right? Two different perspectives is you have this new system or this new product that is taking away maybe some responsibility, and then like you said, it's also adding some responsibility. So there are two reasons why maybe someone won't feel comfortable. And I think that back to what you were saying during implementation, part of that is the reselling, and getting them to feel comfortable and confident in this new product, in this new system, in this new process. And one thing that Josh called out too is that sometimes that sales process can be 3, 6, 9 months long. And so during that process, you're focused on just the technical requirements. Like, does your system and does your process do what we need it to do? But once you actually get into implementation, you think about long-term use, you now have to focus on not only just the technical requirements, but like the long-term value add of that product and service over time. And so how does this actually fit within just the operations now of this company in general, stepping away from just the tech itself? How does this fit into the day-to-day? And you have to find those opportunities to plug into pushing that value for the day-to-day. So in that detractor, how can, even if this is taking away certain responsibilities, still improve your day-to-day, by X? And the same thing, like Helen, you were mentioning, if this is adding more to your responsibilities, how is this improving that experience, even if it is adding something? And then also, I think a unique part about implementation too is, which I think we don't get a lot of focus on, or there's not a lot of emphasis on this during implementation, is it's a key time to really reimagine the client's processes internally too, right? Typically when clients are coming to a new system or a new product, new vendor, whatever we want to say, it's because they either don't have a system in place or they're not happy with their current system. And so there is room to redo whatever's been done before and optimize on the new system, right? And so I think there's room for that too. When you have that conversation, you unlock some of those potential areas of growth that maybe that detractor has not really thought about. And so while they may be focusing on how this is taking away something from them, if they change something, improve a process internally, it's actually going to be a value add for them. And so just finding those opportunities to really stick to those points, helps you battle those situations where you have someone that may not be completely sold and on board.
Yeah, I love that so much. It's like at the most basic level, like what's in it for you, right? Like how is this going to make your life easier, your job easier? I had a really good friend who's in client success, and I've stolen his catchphrase. Everyone I work with now thinks it was mine, but it's not, it's his. And he would always say, what's the so what? Like, so what? Like, what's in it? What's in it for me? What's in it for you? Like, why should I be doing this? Why should I care about it? And usually, if someone at a company decided to invest time, money, resources into buying a product, like someone thought that there was something in it for them. So, that resell, to your point, just reiterating, really, really critical and a good
Well,
opportunity for
in the
positive
payroll
change.
and HR space, and I think this also probably applies in a lot of industries, but it's not always the case that the reason why they're changing is because of a desire or knowledge of what your platform can do that the one they're coming from can't. A lot of times they don't even know to ask, or to inquire about, whether or not we can give them a dashboard that gives them one-click access to X, Y, or Z. So once, to the point of, what's the so what, that's a great kind of way to present a question to, the stakeholders that you're implementing for, and, to get them to, explain, what they would want in their new experience that you're capable of actually delivering, that they wouldn't know to ask for to begin with, that wouldn't necessarily come up in the context of the demo. In this case, a lot of times when we get into it with the person who is the biggest objector to the new thing, it's just that they want us to take away, most of the menu options that are displaying in the drop downs because they're not relevant. They want us to give them a dashboard that gives them one-click access to 3 reports. It's not rocket science, but if we don't take the time to ask the question specifically of that individual directly, they usually, a lot of times they're the saboteur because there was a vote. It was 3-1 in our favor, and they were the one. And so, we kind of, they're not going to necessarily volunteer to us. Okay, well, if you want me to be happy, I need to see X, Y, Z. So then we approach them. We're like, what will make you happy? What do you want to see? Here are some ideas. But we need you to, meet us halfway and, give us exactly what are those hyperlinks need to bring you to? What menu options do we need to take away so it's not cluttering up your eye space? Things like that.
Yeah, and so I'm hearing a lot about how when a client comes in, if it's a small pilot team or somebody who purchased it and now is passing it on to a team that's now going to have to adopt this, there's 2 things that really stood out to me in what you were saying is this idea of reselling, reimagining, because each of those people might not have been part of that sales process. They might not have been part of the conversation saying, what are your pain points? What are the reasons you're switching from one service to another? Or why do you need this service to begin with? The so what that Helen pointed out. And I think that's so interesting because when we get into that transition from sales to implementation, that's sometimes where we see a lot of the friction. That's where we really hear a lot of kind of in the theme of Festivus grievances and onboarding, because that change management point is one of the most critical points to set it off, because that's when you're kicking off your implementation. That's when you're trying to get everybody to get started, hit the ground running. And if it's slow to implement, then that is really slow to the entire kind of relationship. So during the sales process, expectations around resources and timelines are often set to win the client, but those promises don't always align with the realities of the actual implementation. That creates these challenges on delivering the expectations. How do you navigate these situations? How do you manage that client relationship? Is there maybe some actionable advice that you have for us as kind of attendees of this panelist. And I want to throw this to Osiris because I know that when we were talking before, you had a real passion for this. Is there any kind of tips and tricks that you can give us for that?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is my favorite part of the implementation journey, and I hound this in with my team directly, because once you get into implementation, the client no longer needs to, for the most part, be sold, right? Like they're in it, they've signed the contract. Now we need to get set up, right? Now this is where we really need to get real about what is this going to look like, the real expectations, how do we ensure that you're set up properly, and we don't continue to sell you false hopes if that was, potentially the tactic that was done during sales, right? And we all work with sales, and we know sometimes we want to get, clients across the finish line, and business reasons, right? Like we want the business, we want to get the client and in some way, shape, or form, we'll do what we need to do to keep it. But I think there are a couple of things that really help with that transition from sales to implementation. And I think where it starts first and foremost is having a complete knowledge transfer from sales to implementation team. Sometimes these sales cycles can be months long. Sometimes they can be really quick, weeks long, right? Depending on the need and the urgency of the client. I've been a part of sales processes where they've been a year long of negotiations, contract red lines, deep dive requirements, specs, things like that. And I think where it starts, and most importantly, where the implementation team is set up for success to really deliver, is ensuring that they understand the history and the requirements of the client, right? So, I'm speaking with a salesperson and I get on a call with them. All right, what do you have documented? What are the requirements? What are the timelines really that I am working up against for this client to implement them? What do I really need to know? What did we sell them that maybe we shouldn't have? And now implementation team going into this, need to be aware of. So either we need to find ways on the back end to ensure that we can do what we sold them, or we're prepared to come to the client with that transparency of, hey, I know this was promised. We can't do this now. Maybe this is a Q2, Q3 thing. This is what we do in the interim to make sure that you all get set up, right? So it's first that just alignment on the history, what's required, what does the implementation team really need to know during going into the implementation. I think what's also really important too when having that transition from sales to implementation is really understanding the resources and who the implementation team is going to be working with, understanding the client. Who are the POCs that we're going to be working with on the day-to-day, in this HR payroll tech space? Am I working with the VP of finance? Am I working with the people team? Who am I working with? Because that's going to help me understand the conversations that I'm having and what is the most important information I'm relaying to these individuals on the other side of the screen, right? And I think in understanding who your stakeholders are, who you're really working with, and the resources on their side, that helps you establish clear expectations for timelines, the expectations on their end, and what they will need to provide, and most importantly, the dedication. I think oftentimes there's a lack of understanding of what's actually needed from the client when they cross over from sales to implementation, and you start going through implementation, you roll out project plans, you're asking for A, B, and C, and they're like, whoa, I didn't know we had to do all this. You're asking me for 30 documents and to sign off on this and to do this and click this in the platform. You're like, okay, let's take a moment to step back. Let's set some expectation here. This is what we need from you. This is what you can expect for us. And I think that's the pivotal piece of ensuring a good relationship during the implementation, if those expectations are super clear of what's required from who and when and how everything is going to run.
Yeah, I would echo that. I'll just jump in. I think obviously it happens. Sometimes people make promises that they can't keep, or an expectation is set that is maybe a little bit off. In my experience, the best way to avoid that is to involve the client success team or a solution architect as early in the process as possible, so that everybody is aligned from the start about what is realistic and what is not, and we don't have misses like that. The best way to avoid bad expectations is just not to set them, right? And sometimes that can't be avoided, but I think the earlier we can involve, the right teams to the conversation, the better off everybody is for it.
Absolutely. A couple of tips or tricks, kind of that we use around around this is, I think on our side, it all comes down to a successful kickoff call. The idea that implementation actually takes, the proposal that the client signed as the end all and be all of what they actually need or want. Everybody knows, I mean, sales has a job. It's to, demonstrate what the product is capable of doing, to win buy-in, to get a signed agreement. But implementation is where, we actually put it all into reality. So we end up, we have a kickoff call. The kickoff call, our implementation team, one of their key core things that they own is they own their daily, hour to hour, day to day, obligations that they have committed to. So sometimes we get a deal that comes in, and through the closed deal, it indicates they want to go live for a first pay date of, the 12/23. And we do a kickoff call, and our lead implementer on the kickoff call, because of our own schedules and whatnot, will, if schedules warrant it, start things off by saying, so, as far as things look on this side, January 10th looks like the perfect go live date. Are you guys on board for that? As opposed to, I know you indicated in sales that you wanted to go live on 12/23, but we just, is it okay if, we go live on the second pay date of 2025 instead? We find a lot more success in leading as opposed to following when we do the kickoff call, when we talk through the scope of work. And what are we talking about when we talk about time and labor management? And then we start to do the build. And then, if they throw a curveball at us midstream, then, we deal with that accordingly. But by this point, with a successful kickoff call, we usually have gotten past anything that sales might have said in a certain way that was interpreted or perceived in a way that's not how it's actually going to be.
I love that. And I would back it up even more. Like, I am such a fan of kickoff calls. I want to have an internal kickoff call before the kickoff call with the client, right? Like,
Yeah.
let's not forget that one too. And a part of that dialogue, to your point exactly, would be like, hey, sales team, like the client said they want to go live on the 23rd. Well, guess what? Like, we don't have the resources to support that unless we move mountains, which we're not really keen on doing. So like, how about this date? Do you think the client is going to be receptive to that? Do you think they're going to push back? Like, let's feel that out before we hop on a call with a client and just start having those conversations, right? And then being met with resistance. I will not share which company I was working with when this happened. One of the most scary kickoff calls that I have ever been on was one where we did not conduct an internal kickoff call first. We got on the call with the client, and the client said to us, well, wait a second, we haven't actually even signed this contract yet, and we're not even sure if we're going to. So why are we talking about timelines?
Yeah, that's awkward.
Like, it was
That's
like,
a misalignment.
okay, that is a huge misalignment from everybody.
Yep.
There was a huge breakdown of communication. We didn't follow the processes internally that should have been. And at the end of the day, it was embarrassing for everyone on the call, right? So like, we can, there's my grievance for Festivus. There's my Festivus implementation story of like the most stressful, embarrassing call I've ever had to participate in, where it's like, maybe we should have like thought through our processes a little bit better on that one.
Right.
Well, yeah.
I think
Yeah, sorry, Osiris. I was just gonna say the thing about onboarding kickoff calls, right? We hear this all the time, is that every client's different. It can't all be the same, no repeatable processes, and it's just we've really come to a point now where like repeatable processes and automation is a standing point of any system, right? I work at Setuply, I use repeatable processes to do my timelines and to assign things. But the kickoff call, if done correctly, can really, in a structure, address a lot of those issues. The one thing that we've implemented here is just a tip and trick, is that we actually don't create our projects or any of our timelines, which is an automated process, until we get the information from sales. So even if the sale is done beautifully, and I have to say our salespeople are amazing, but we've all been in those situations. Like even if the sale's done perfectly right, to Helen's point, you still need to know what's going on. Like we can't get on these calls and then be like, I just spent a year talking to your salesperson. How come you don't know anything about me? Like it's kind of a little crazy.
I think to what Helen was saying earlier about having the right people on those calls is really important, and to
Critical.
what both Josh and Helen were saying about, Josh was saying we lead the kickoff call, right? So if we come in knowing that the client wants a 1223 and we know internally we don't have the resources, and we get to the call trying to push in the right direction, I think one thing that's really powerful about the kickoff call, and this is something that, I think it's really important for implementation managers to understand, to some extent, you really do own the timeline for implementation, right? Like we do have an understanding of what the client may want, and under certain circumstances, like if it's critical, if it's business critical that we have to hit in a certain timeline, we make it happen. But we can really enforce the timeline. The clients really don't understand what is required on our end, what the timelines really are, so we can influence that. And I think what's really important when we're looking at the kickoff call is to do that and to make the client feel, like Helen said, receptive for maybe a potential change in what we're doing. It's important to have sales on the kickoff call as well. Oftentimes you're going through, like you said, Kristen, it could be a year-long sales process, or even 6 months. That's a long time. Even 2 months, right? Where, or even just 2 months, you're talking only to this sales individual. Then you get onto a kickoff call with an implementation manager that you've never met before. This is your first time speaking, and now that new person is coming to you saying, actually, no, we can't do this, right? Like, that's not a good feeling, because I've been speaking to someone for 2 months and now you're telling me something completely opposite. And so I think it's important to have all the internal stakeholders who have been involved in that process present, because it makes the client feel more supported. And in the event that maybe we do have to suggest an alternative timeline, who they've been communicating with over the past few months or year is on that call, and they feel as though their champion internally is there and agrees with this potential shift in timeline, as opposed to this new person coming on and saying, we can't make this happen.
Yeah.
Definitely. And as the owner of that timeline, how do you three, I'll kind of pose it to the group just as a follow-up question. How do you kind of let clients know that maybe the delays are on their side? How do you kind of gently kind of bring it back to the forefront to say, hey, we are set to go live January 10th. We agreed on that, but I've sent you 10 things that I need you to get done, and we're not seeing the progress on that. How do you kind of gently move the needle forward in those situations?
Not gently.
Not gently.
We're direct. We're not rude, but we're direct. Clients, so when the client has committed to, go live date of X, and we are mapping out our work accordingly. It is, the lead implementer on that project has committed their calendar to, to that project. And, to the extent, of course, we deal with this on the regular. I mean, we have 40 active projects or more going on now. And there's, let's see, we've got, I don't know, 5 off track. And those are off track either because of the client or because of us. Probably a couple of them definitely because of the client. And we have in one case the old payroll providers holding them hostage by not giving them copies of their quarterly tax returns. Things like that. So we just, we tell them, hey, you said you could get us X by such and such a date. We don't have it yet. This puts us at risk for the go live date that we have scheduled. Now we need you to recommit to get us that by Monday, or we need to reschedule go live. I need you to remember that this has to go through QC before we will process a live payroll. So it's not just me that's involved. That's kind of the message we convey.
Yeah.
And I think it helps hold clients accountable when you have had clear communication and explanation as far as what's actually required of them. It's very difficult to hold clients accountable with a laundry list of things that you may need when they actually don't understand either what you're asking them for or maybe why you need it. I tell my team this all the time, like ignorance is not bliss when you're going through implementations, because there often is times where you're working with these stakeholders that don't actually know what they're doing, right? Like a use case is payroll implementation. A lot of these individuals have outsourced vendors for that very reason. They actually don't understand what these tax forms are. They've never seen these registration documents. They don't know what a POA is, right? And so when you're asking them for these things, they just see a list of, okay, you're asking me for these things. Do I really understand why? Why is this important to the implementation? If they understand the importance and we're constantly communicating that to them when there is a delay, now that makes it easier to go back to them and say, hey, you are delayed with giving us this crucial information. As we communicated, this is why this is important. Like you said, Josh, this is why we need those year-to-date payroll reports for QC before we go live, right? And constantly putting that in writing and being really frequent about those reminders and communication of what's required, why, and the timelines for getting them. And I think it's really important too during implementation. I think we often, I know we have our project plans and you have, this is what you need for this milestone and this is what you need for this milestone, but also making it really clear what is important at certain times of the implementation. Because often if you just throw this huge project plan at a client, if you just throw this huge list of information that's needed from them, it could be a little bit jarring. Is this important now? Is this important after implementation? Is this important for QC and testing? Like, when is this important? Because this is also going to help the client prioritize the order in which they get that information to you. And Josh, to your point, using an external third-party vendor, now there's that extra struggle of getting additional information too. So having that understanding of what's my priority at certain timelines, that also helps, holding them accountable if there are delays.
Well, Cyrus, based on some of what you just shared, I think, there's an element of this as well that can be extremely simplified, where, as you were just, suggesting, it all comes down to, the communication, how you are asking for what information from the customer. In our world, the fact of the matter is, in payroll, the term earnings code means something, but to our end user customer, it doesn't mean anything. The right way for us to ask for to answer that question is, how do you pay your employees, and give them some checkboxes, salary, hourly, overtime. But to actually, put a question in front of a new customer that says, what earnings codes do you use? You can only expect that they're going to be silent because they don't know. It doesn't mean anything to them.
So just in the interest of time, I want to move on to our third topic, and that's adoption. So we get to a point in implementation where we see the finish line, the rollout's going to happen. And, when we help to clients adopt new technology, it can be definitely a complex process. So what strategies do you use to communicate effectively with the broader client team during this phase? How do you support maybe the 1 or 2 people of your pilot team that you help train up? They know how to use the system. How do you champion that rollout to define long-term success? And I'd love to point this question to Helen based on your background in customer success and beyond too.
Thanks. Yeah, I had a list of things, and then based on this conversation, I would almost kind of split it into 2 parallel paths, 2 groups. I mean, one is the processes and the core things that you do to help a client familiarize themselves with the tool, right? Like training sessions, frequent check-ins, helping them conduct a UAT, things like that, having regular meetings to check in. But the common theme that we keep talking about today, which I think is so critical, is the human relationship. Like, I feel like if we really develop this rapport and this trust with a client, they are more likely to come to us when they have a question, come to us when they have an issue. And like, we want that, because if they don't ask, they're not going to learn how to use it. They're going to get frustrated, and we're less sticky, right? Like, the goal is get the project implemented, get the client using it, show them the value, and make sure that they're using it to its fullest and best potential. And I think, like, the best way to do that, again, is that relationship. And we were talking about it earlier, Osiris, I think you mentioned it, and I jotted down a note, just how important it is to maintain a consultative relationship with the client too. Like, they sometimes aren't even going to know what to ask for, to Josh's point just now. Like, if you don't know what you don't know, And so it's our job as the subject matter experts, as the software experts, to be able to say, hey, well, did you think about this? Or like, it seems like there could be an easier way to tackle this problem. Have you thought about doing it this way? Hey, here's a new idea. And I think the more that you can do that, the more you build that relationship, you build trust. And I think that's, yeah, I'll just leave it there.
I
Yeah.
think something that is really important to show them that value to create that stickiness. And I think in order to have real, successful adoption, it starts with enablement along the way, right? I think sometimes we think about implementation as this like, okay, get set up first, and then we're going to train you on how to do everything afterwards, when it needs to happen all at the same time. And this goes back to that change management piece that we were talking about at the top of the call, right? Like during the sales process, you spend so much time focusing on the technical requirements of the platform. Okay, great. We know your product can do what we need it to do in terms of the buttons to press, the reports that we need to get, all of that. But now you need to focus on, this comes back, like you said, Ellen, the consultative approach. How does this actually serve us on the day to day? And where you, and I tell my team this, like find pockets of opportunities to train during implementation, right? So if we're on a weekly recurring call and we're going through project status, and maybe we have a call dedicated to, using Josh's example, earnings codes, right? And we're doing our build for pay code setup. I want to be in the platform and actually showing you, okay, this is where the build is happening, but this is actually why and how this impacts you during your actual day-to-day use of this, just as an admin using the platform, right? And finding opportunities to really situate what they're going to be doing on the product, the service, whatever it is that they're using, and how that fits into their day-to-day. And why that's really important is, one, it creates that stickiness, and it also creates that comfort. By the time you're done with implementation, they feel confident that I know how to use the system. This is going to help me in the way that I need to help. But also finding that those opportunities to really dive into the day-to-day use and find opportunities for enablement along the way, regardless of how long the implementation process is. It helps you identify those gaps, right? Because during the sales implementation process, maybe there's just a checkbox list of technical requirements, but you're not really in there using it, testing it, breaking it, like it needs to really ensure that it works for the clients. And when you find opportunities to dive in and enable along the way, that's where you have those conversations of, oh, you just showed us that report. Can it also do this? We need this instead. And when you have those moments, you find moments of where either certainty that everything does work with the client, or you find those opportunities, oh, something is missing here. And is this mission critical to the client's long-term use, or is this just a nice to have, right? Like we've had all those calls with clients where we want this to be blue and the font can be bigger, and can the drop down be an accordion and not, all of this, right? Like, are those mission critical or just feature requests? But what is actually mission critical to this product that we have really being a long-term value add? That way and I like to use the expression like, I want the product to hook into everything internally that you need it to, right? Like I want it to be difficult for you to tear away. And how that happens is for you to really understand the value of it and get to use it. If you don't understand the value, you're not going to use it as much. Maybe you use just one report, one aspect of the platform, and then you're not really adopting the full package that's ultimately going to help and fit in with your org's needs long term.
One of the most, kind of piggybacking on what Osiris shared and what Helen did as well, but a little bit of a different angle. One of the most impactful things that we've found for early adoption is in the first experience that we give a customer logging into the system, and kind of guiding them through the dashboard and whatnot. And there are certain things that they ask for that do require us to double check our work and make sure that we get it right, so we don't do on the fly. But there are some simple basic things that, if they make a comment about too many menu options in the navigation, or things like that, where we can on the fly, while we are on the call in a live session, we can actually make a couple of tweaks that they see immediately. And as they see us do that and see the dynamic, kind of way in which we can make their experience better, it helps open their mind to things they otherwise, are shut off to, as far as, how their experience with other systems, when it's in a box on a shelf, I can't actually, if you use QuickBooks, QuickBooks is QuickBooks. There's, it is what it is. Good luck getting, anything escalated through into it, to actually see it happen in live production. But, in this case, you can enable your, end user to actually see how, customer centric, your service you're offering is, if there are certain things that you're able to do on the fly or very quickly for them, while there's the other things that you have to table and let them know, well, this requires a little bit of testing. I'm not going to put you at risk as far as whether or not you can get into the thing that you want. But give me till tomorrow and I'll get back to you.
Love that. And just
Yeah.
to jump in and add to it, it's also like showing them on the fly does several things, right? Like one, it like builds trust, builds their confidence. They think, wow, this tool is so user-friendly and easy. And then it also shows them like, I want to empower my customers to be able to do whatever they can do on their own. Right. And like the way that I position that isn't that we don't want to do it for them, but it's that, hey, you have like the power and the ability to do this on the fly whenever you want. You don't have to go through support. You don't have to wait for me to email you back. Like, let me show you how easy this is. Right.
Mhm.
And I feel like that goes a really long way too with adoption, is just showing people like what do they have access to themselves? How easy is it? And that goes back to part of the so what too. Like, how is this going to make your life easier rather than harder?
An excellent way to put it. And I want to open, in the last 10 minutes we have here, I want to open the webinar chat to anybody who might have a question for our panelists or something that you might be struggling with, maybe a grievance of your own. If you want to pop that in the chat, we'd be happy to address any of those. It's funny how implementation managers sometimes are put in positions where we are like post sales, right? Like we're sales post sales, and then we're also consultants, and we're also customer success managers worrying about the value, and we're also the product liaison to say, hey, is this button being blue really a mission critical for you? Like there's a lot of different hats that we get to wear when we're in the implementation space, and I think that's what is probably so addicting about it, right? Because it's not ever the same thing. Even if you're using repeatable processes, even if you're using automation, you're getting to really be a puzzle solver, be a firefighter, be a champion, be a cheerleader. For each of these clients, it's a very rewarding space to be in, because you get to see somebody come in with either high expectations, low expectations, but see them come all the way down to the adoption phase and see them be really successful with something that maybe they even struggled with to begin with.
And I think what you just called out here is why, I'm sure all of us would agree here, some may say we're biased, but I think truly why implementation is the most valuable part of the client journey, because what you just said, Kristen, hits it on the nail, right? Like post sales, the client is not going to be set up for success, and we will not deliver unless implementation there is to catch them, right? And there is not the potential long-term relationship with the client when we're thinking about customer success down the line without that implementation window. And that's where you train the client, ensure that their needs are met, you get everything set up, which is important. You have that product feedback, right? So not only are you ensuring that the client is set up for success and the product is meeting their needs, but you're also ensuring that the product meets the needs of other clients by relaying that feedback and sort of seeing the constant issues that clients are facing during the implementation that not only impact clients during implementation, but other clients down the line as well. Because what's important during implementation when we're looking at just active use and setup is also important for a client 3 months, 3 years down the line to still be able to use and get the value out of the product as well. So, got a implementation.
To your point, Osiris, you see this in, as a general rule, a successful implementation. It doesn't happen on every account, but as a general rule, a successful implementation on product one ensures that at some point down the road, they're going to be coming back through implementation on product number two and product number three. You do it well, and they have that confidence, they have that good experience with service, and now they want time and labor management, or they want HR, or they want whatever it is that your, business happens to be, selling and implementing. They'll be hungry for more, if you create that right, first customer experience.
So true. And I mean, at risk of sounding cliche, like first impressions are so important, right? Like
Mhm.
this is the client's first opportunity to work with us. Like, who are we? How do we problem solve? What do we offer? Like all of these kind of bigger questions come into play, and they get to see us like walk the walk, right? And not just talk the talk anymore. And I think a successful implementation, to the point earlier, plays a big part into the adoption, too, and how excited people are to use the tool.
Mhm.
We are all so connected at this point, especially post-COVID, with it becoming a very virtual world, and kind of building out these relationships and networks that we have with our colleagues, our clients. Like, there is a good chance that if you are in the same space for a long time, you might run into another client in another role that you have, and kind of setting that first expectation from that very first time you meet. I mean, it can really make a lasting impact. It can trust somebody to make a decision with you that impacts their whole team, or changes a clear process, or makes them champion something internally that wouldn't necessarily have the same oomph if your salesperson was to just call and say, hey, this is what we're trying to do. Like, to Josh's point, if you get them onboarded with one great product, then when it comes to new innovation that you come out with, it's a lot easier for that consult to come in and be like, hey, you need this too, because it solves your other problems. We're wearing all of those different hats, but at the end of the day, I think we're part, empathy, and we're part colleague for some of these folks. Like, you really feel like you're part of their team after a little while. So I think, yeah, implementation is just the best. Again, biased, but I think that, despite some of the common problems we all face, there's a lot more conversation to be had about some of the ways to combat them. And I'm really glad that we were able to take an hour out of our day to really talk about some of these things. And I really want to thank our panelists again, Osiris, Josh, Helen. Thank you so much for being here and for lending your experience to us. I think it's so important for us to hear from different verticals, from different perspectives, even different job roles that still touch on this implementation piece as we kind of move forward into a new year, right? So we are going to wrap things up. Again, it's Osiris Childs from Deal. We have Josh Robinson from Checkmate HCM, and we have Helen Bubeck from Crisis 24. Check out their LinkedIn profiles. We'll be posting about it on LinkedIn as well, and get in touch with them if you need to. But we are going to pass this over to Melissa. Oh, and I'm Kristen, and I work on the implementation side here at Setuply. We're going to pass it over to Melissa, who is our Director of Marketing for Setuply, and she is going to let us know about our gift card giveaway, because this is a holiday after all, and what would the holidays be without a little capitalism? So over to you, Melissa.
Yes, thank you, Kristen. Thank you all for attending today's webinar. We will be drawing the winners of our $50 Amazon gift cards after this session ends, and I'll be in touch with all the winners. We have all of your emails to get in touch with you, but you will be hearing from me soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the invitation. It was great conversation, and nice to meet you both, Osiris and Josh, too.
Happy Festivus.
Indeed.
Happy Festivus for the rest of us.
Everyone.
Yes.
Thank you again. Have a great rest of your day. Enjoy your holidays.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye, guys.